Okay, so this video is about density, and density aligns with standard CLE 3221.1.1. So let's talk about the definition of density, and then we'll go into how to solve for density, mass, or volume. So the textbook definition of density is just the degree of compactness of a substance. What that means in layman's terms is how close together the atoms or molecules of a substance are. So if those molecules and atoms are really, really close together, that's going to be a very dense material. If they're really far apart, that's going to be a less dense material. And density is an intensive property. That's a new vocabulary word. All it means is that it doesn't matter how much of that substance you have, that property is going to be the same. So when we're talking about water, the known density of water is 1. It can be 1 gram per liter. It can be 1 centimeter cubed per kiloliter. Anything that's a mass and a volume. And it doesn't matter if we have 1 liter of water or if we take the whole ocean. If we divide the mass of that by the volume of that, we're going to get the same number, and that's our density. So density is measured by dividing the mass of a substance by the volume of the substance. The way that we write that out as an equation is density is equal to mass divided by volume, or simply D is equal to M over V, where D stands for density, M stands for mass, and V stands for volume. So let's do some practice math. This first one is going to be how to solve for density. And when you're doing math in chemistry, or really anytime, the first thing that you should always do is simply write out your equation. So we just talked about our equation, and we know that density is D equals M over V. D is density, M is mass, and V is volume. So if we read our question, it says, what is the density of an object with a mass of 3.22 grams and a volume of 1.20 liters? Well, it asks us in that first sentence, it says, what is the density? That means we are going to be solving for density. If we keep reading, of an object with a mass of 3.22 grams. Well, here we see 3.22 grams. We know that grams is a unit of mass, and it also says it has a mass of 3.22 grams. So we can go ahead and plug that in, 3.22 grams, because that's our mass. So we're plugging that in the same place as the M. If we keep reading, it says, and a volume of 1.20 liters. Again, we know that liters is a unit of volume. It also says this is the volume. So we know that we're going to be dividing by 1.20 liters. So that's how we set it up, and now comes the simple part of just typing it into your calculator. And you're going to put 3.22 divided by 1.20, and when you do that, you're going to get 2.68, and our units do not cancel here because grams cannot cancel with liters. They are not the same. So our units are just going to be grams per liter because grams was written on top and liters was written on the bottom. When you write your answers in chemistry, go ahead and just give me 2 decimal points. We'll just make that a general rule and make sure that you put a box around your answer. So that is how you solve for density, and every single time you are asked to solve for density, that's what you are going to do. Alright, so our next slide, these are just 2 practice problems to help you practice solving for density, and we will do some more practice in class. Go ahead and pause the video, do both of these practice problems, and we'll go over the answers in class. The next example that I'm going to do on the video is I'm going to show you how to solve for mass. It's pretty simple. So if we read our problem, it says the density of aluminum is 2.7 grams per milliliter. What mass of aluminum is there if I have an aluminum bar that has a volume of 20 centimeters cubed? The first thing you should notice here is it says what mass. And if it says what mass, that should give you a clue that you are going to solve for mass. The way that you should go about solving equations that aren't already set up, so when we solve for density, it's set up to have density all by itself. We want to go ahead and rearrange that equation to get mass by itself. So we write out density is equal to mass over volume. We want to get our m all by itself because we're solving for mass here. Well, right now it is being divided by the volume. So in order to get rid of that volume over here by our mass, we're just going to multiply by our v and it will cancel out. Well, anything that you do on one side, you have to come over here and do to the other. So we'll multiply by v on that side. And what you're left with, you'll just bring down everything, is volume times density is equal to mass. Now all we have to do is worry about plugging in our numbers. So let's go back up to our question. It says the density of aluminum is 2.7 grams per milliliter. What mass of aluminum is there if I have an aluminum bar with a volume of 20 centimeters cubed? What you should notice here is that there's a discrepancy with our units. For our density, we are given a volume unit of milliliters. But our volume is given to us in centimeters cubed. But don't worry, because if you come down here to our hint, it tells us that 1 milliliter is exactly equal to 1 centimeter cubed. So we can use those units interchangeably. So this volume of 20 centimeters cubed is just 20 milliliters. I did something that I didn't mean to do, so let me get us back to the right slide. All right, so we just decided that 20 centimeters cubed is equal to 20 milliliters. And earlier, we found out that volume times density is equal to mass. And you should still have everything copied down, so I hope this doesn't confuse you too much. So all we have to do now is just plug in the right numbers. So our volume, we decided to say 20 milliliters because 1 milliliter is equal to 1 centimeter cubed. And our density up here is 2.7 grams per milliliter. And that's going to be equal to our mass. Now if we look at our units, you can see that this milliliter is in a denominator and this milliliter is not. That means that they are going to cancel out. And then we plug in 20 times 2.7, and we're going to get 54, and since our milliliters canceled out, that is going to be grams. You don't have to worry about leaving 2 decimal places here because it worked out to be a whole number. And that is equal to our mass, and we circle our answer. So every time you have to solve for mass and you're given density and volume, this is the process that you're going to follow. So here are a couple of practice problems for solving mass, and again, we are going to have some more practice in class, so go ahead and pause the video, work out these 2 problems, and we'll discuss the answers in class. For our last example, we're going to learn how to solve for volume, and this is what students usually struggle with, so you may want to watch this process 2 or 3 times before going on to the practice. So let's read the question. The density of iron is 7.874 grams per centimeter cubed. What volume, so there's our question, what volume of iron do I have if the mass of my sample is 4.59 grams? Well, just like we did when we were solving for mass, we want to rearrange our equation before we actually plug in any numbers. So we know that our density equation is density is equal to mass over volume. Make sure that you have this as a D and not as a B. Well, this time, instead of trying to get M all by itself, we're trying to get V all by itself. Well, right now, our volume is in the denominator, and there is no way to get that out of the denominator unless we multiply. So we have to multiply by V as our first step. We do that on both sides. Over here, our V cancels out, and then we have V times D equals M. But we don't want M by itself, we want V. So in order to do that, V is being multiplied by D, and we can just divide both sides by our D. And when we do that, D will cancel out over here. And I'm going to go ahead and bring my equation over to here. And we are left with nothing but V on the left side. And mass divided by density is what's left on our right side. Now we can go ahead and plug in the numbers. So it said that our mass is 4.59 grams. This makes sense because we know grams are a measure of mass. So we take 4.59 grams and we divide by our density, which was actually given to us before it gave us our mass, so that might be a little bit confusing. Make sure you read carefully. And our density is 7.874 grams per centimeter cubed. And if we look, we see that grams is on the top of our fraction and it's also on the bottom. That means that they're going to cancel. So grams cancels out. We do our math, so that's 4.59 divided by 7.874. When we do that, you get a decimal, so you can go ahead and just give me those two decimal places. And we get 0.58. Our grams canceled out, so we are left here with centimeters cubed. Or, if you wanted to write milliliters, remember centimeters cubed and milliliters are the same thing. And we'll draw a box around our answer. So this is usually where students have the most trouble, is solving for volume. So you may want to watch this video a few times, and it's going to be available to you on Canvas all the time. So that is how we solve for volume. And here are a couple of practice problems for volume. Go ahead and pause the video, work these out, and again, we will do the answers in class. The last thing that I want you to do as part of this video homework is I want you to devise a method. That's just a fancy way to say come up with a way that you could determine the density of a solid or a liquid in the lab. So what we want to focus on here are the materials that we would need. That's what I mean when I say instruments. So you like what materials, what lab supplies would you need? We talked about lab supplies already. And what procedures would you follow? It's okay if you can't come up with the fanciest way to do this. We're going to talk about it again in class when we do our lab. So this was our first video on density. Come prepared with questions in class.